Ladies and gentlemen, oh, that's very loud. Thank you very much for coming along to Dundee Literary Festival, and I'd like to welcome Maggie O'Farrell to the festival. I'm a bit of a fangirl, one of my favourite authors, so I'm very excited. So I might lose the plot, so I need you all to ask lots of questions. How we're going to work today is, I think you're going to do a little bit of reading, and then I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll open up the floor a bit. So, ladies and gentlemen, can we give a warm Dundee welcome to Maggie?
Hello, everybody. I've never read a lectern which is see-through before, but we'll give it a go. I thought I'd start with a short reading. So this is from my new book, Instructions for a Heatwave, and it's set in the heatwave of 1976. I don't know if Dundee felt the effects of this or not, I don't know. They did, oh that's good, someone's nodding, that's good. Well, this is about an Irish family living in London. And one day in the middle of the heatwave, the father, who's a very kind of regular man of very regular habits, just walks out to buy a newspaper, as he does every morning, but this time he doesn't come back. And so his wife, Gretta, is forced to call back home her grown-up children. And so this part I'm going to read is from the point of view of the eldest sibling, who's called Michael Francis. And he's looking back to when he first met his parents-in-law. When he'd first been taken to meet Claire's parents, the thing he'd been most struck by was how nice they all were to each other, how extraordinarily polite and considerate. The parents called each other dearest. At dinner, her mother asked him, if she could trouble him, would he mind awfully passing the butter? It had taken him a moment to decode the grammar of this sentence, to grope his way along its abstruse semantic loops. The father fetched a scarf, silk with a pattern of brass padlocks, for the mother when she mentioned it was chilly. The brother talked voluntarily about the game of rugby he played that day at school. The parents asked Claire Bear, as they called her, about her essays, her lectures, the dates of her exams. The food came in china serving dishes, each with its own lid. They helped each other to portions and then seconds. It had amazed him and made him want to laugh. There was no shouting, no swearing, no people flouncing off from the table, no silent brooding, no scramble for your fair share of potatoes. No spoons were thrown, no one picked up the carving knife, held it to their throat and cried, "Will I kill myself here and now?" He didn't think anyone in his family would be able to identify the vague area of his PhD, never mind get down the calendar and write the dates and details of his exams, never mind reel off a list of books that might be useful for him, never mind fetch those books from their library. He found their inquiries as to what he was studying, how much teaching he did, whether he had enough time to devote to his PhD, induced a feeling of mild panic. He would have preferred them to ignore him so that he could eat as much of the food as possible, to stare around at the oil paintings on the wall, the bay window that opened onto a sweeping lawn, to absorb the revelation that he was sleeping with a girl who still addressed her parents as Mummy and Daddy. But they would not give up. How many siblings did he have? What did they do? Where had he grown up? That his father worked in a bank seemed to satisfy them, but the disclosure that he was going to Ireland over the summer seemed to cause surprise. Michael's parents are Irish, Claire said. And was it his imagination, or was there a hint of warning in her voice, a slight wrinkle in the atmosphere? Really? Her father turned his eyes on him, as if searching for some physical manifestation of this. He was seized with an urge to recite a Hail Mary, just to see what they would do. "I am indeed," he would announce over the artichokes. Horrible, inedible, spiked things they were. "I'm a Paddy, a Catholic, a Mick, a Fenian, and I deflowered your daughter." "Yes," he said, instead. "From Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland?" He struggled for a moment with a desire to correct Claire's father. "It's the Republic of Ireland," he wanted to say, not Southern Ireland. He swallowed. "The South." "Ah, but you're not IRA, are you?" His hand, carrying food to his mouth, stopped. An artichoke leaf hovered in mid-air. A drop of melted butter fell to the plate. He stared at the man in front of him. "You're asking me if I'm in the IRA?" "Daddy," Claire murmured. The man smiled, a quick, thin smile. "No, merely whether you or your family, whether my family's in the IRA." Just an inquiry, no offence intended. He had Claire that night at 1 a.m. on her flowery bedspread, and when he realised he hadn't used a condom, he was glad. He was angrily glad. And next morning at breakfast, he was still glad as she sat there, irreproachable in a sprigged summer dress, on a straight-back chair, helping herself to scrambled eggs and asking her father if she could pass him anything. He was less glad, 3 weeks later, when she came to tell him that her period hadn't come. Even less glad again when a month after that, he'd gone home to tell his parents he was getting married. His mother had shot him a quick, assessing look, then sat down at the table. "Oh, Michael Francis," she'd whispered, her hand held to her forehead. "What?" his father said, looking from one to the other. "What's the matter?" "How could you do this to me?" "What?" his father said again. "He's knocked someone up," Aoife muttered. "Eh? Knocked someone up, Dad?" she repeated loudly, lolling on the sofa, her flawless 14-year-old limbs sprawling over the arms. "Impregnated her, put a bun in the oven, got a girl in trouble, done a—" "That will do," his father said to her. Aoife shrugged a shoulder, then eyed Michael Francis as if with new interest. "Is this true?" his father said, turning to him. He opened his hands. "This was not meant to happen," he wanted to say. "She wasn't meant to be the one I married. I was going to do my PhD, sleep with everyone I could lay my hands on, then go to America. This marriage and baby were not part of the plan." "The wedding's in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? His mother started to cry. "In Hampshire. You don't have to come if you don't want to." "Oh, Michael Francis," his mother said again. "Where in Hampshire?" his father asked. "Is she Catholic?" Aoife said, swinging her bare foot, biting a crescent from her biscuit. Their mother gasped. Is she? Is she a Catholic?" She glanced across at the Sacred Heart that hung on the wall. "Please tell me she is." He cleared his throat, shooting a furious look at Aoife. "She is not." "What is she then?" I don't know. C of E, I guess, but I don't think it's a very important part of..." Their mother lurched from the table with a wail. Their father slapped his newspaper against his palm. Aoife said, apparently to no one, "She's gone and knocked up a prod." "Shut your bloody mouth, Aoife," he hissed. "Mind your language," his father thundered. "This'll be the death of me," their mother cried from the bathroom, rattling the bottles of her tranquilizers. "You might as well just kill me now." "Fine," Aoife murmured. "Who wants to go first?" So those are the Riordans, or some of them. The middle child is missing there. But I thought I might read you, if that's have I got time to do another short
Of course
bit,
you
if
do.
that's okay. I'll read you a little bit about Aoife, who you met there when she is 14 and stirring trouble. She grows up, I think at this point, this is when the book's open, she's 23. And she's run away from London and her family and gone to New York. And she's working as the assistant to a photographer. And she has a very dark secret that she's kept from everybody in that she cannot read. She's functionally illiterate. She has what we now recognise pretty quickly as dyslexia, but in the 50s when she was growing up in London, nobody knew what this was, had any idea. So they just thought she was being obtuse and difficult and stubborn. So she's managed to conceal from everybody that she can't actually read. Aoife feels herself to be cursed, like those people in folk tales who are singled out for the random cruelty of some higher being, condemned forever to have a wing instead of an arm, or to live underground, or to take the form of a reptile. She cannot read. She cannot do that thing that other people find so artlessly easy, to see arrangements of ink shaped on a page and alchemize them into meaning. She can create letters, she can form them with the nib of a pen or the lead of a pencil, but she cannot get them to line up in the right order, in a sequence that anyone else could understand. She doesn't know why this is. She suspects that, as a baby, she crossed paths with a sorcerer who was in a bad mood that day, and on seeing her, on passing her pram, decided to suck this magical ability from her, to leave her cast out, washed up on the shores of illiteracy and ignorance, cursed forever. On her first day in the studio, Evelyn had handed her a contract and asked her to check it over, then fill it in. Eva had taken it and laid it on the table, and when Evelyn left the room, Eva had bent over it, one hand held over her left eye. There was a sudden crushing weight on her chest, and it was difficult to draw breath into her lungs. Please, her mind was saying. She wasn't sure to whom. Please, please. Let me get through this, just this once. I'll do anything, anything at all. Contract, she could recognise right at the top of the page. That was good. Evelyn had said it was a contract. Or did it perhaps say contact? Was there an R there? Aoife pressed her left eye hard with the heel of her palm and scanned the now undulating string of letters that made up the words. Was there an R? And if so, where ought it to be? Before the T, or after the T, or next to the C? And if so, which C? Panic cramming her throat, she told herself to leave contract or contact, or whatever the hell it said, and look down the page. And when she did, she knew she was doomed. For the page on the table was crammed with text, impossibly small text, closely printed, words like lines of black ants crawling over the white. They clustered and rearranged themselves before her eyes. They dissolved themselves from their linear left-right structure and formed themselves into long, wavering columns, top to bottom. They swayed and flexed like long grasses in a wind. She saw for a moment a V reaching up for an embrace with the empty arms of an H. She noticed an A in proximity to an O, which brought to mind the arrangement of her own name. She caught hold briefly of a collocation of letters that said possibly fraught or maybe taught, but the next moment it was gone. She was fighting down tears, knowing that it was over, that this job, this chance she'd been given, was scuppered like so many before it. And she was weighing up the pros and cons of just walking out when she heard Evelyn coming back along the corridor. Aoife wasn't aware of the moment in which she made the decision. All she knew was that she was lifting contract up by its corner, up and away, with only the tips of her fingers, as if it radiated some kind of toxic material. She was sliding it into a blue folder, and she was putting the blue folder into a box on top of a filing cabinet. As she came into the room, Evelyn said, "All finished with the contract?" And because Aoife wanted this job, she wanted it so badly. And why shouldn't she have a good job, an interesting job, like other people did? Damn that sorcerer to hell. She turned round. She smiled her confidential half smile. She folded her hands together and said, "Yes, all done. Thank you very much."
That was lovely, thank you. I think the first reading kind of leads into my first question quite neatly, because so many of your books are about families and secrets and lies. And in that first reading, it seemed like Claire's family were perfect. Do you think every family has those, if we dug into Claire's family, would they have the same, secrets somewhere hidden in their past?
Yeah.
Do you reckon
I think all families have, and I think there are some that just hide it better than others. I think families and secrets are always going to be a big draw for novelists, because I think we've all got one. We've all got a family, haven't we? We all come from someone, from two people at least, whether we like it or not. And I think, I don't know. It's funny actually. When I was writing this book, I kept trying to kind of read around the subject. I kept trying to look at how other novelists had dealt with the subject of family. And it was one of those situations that I couldn't tell whether it was just because I was becoming a bit obsessed, and you get to that point where you think that everything you look at is about the thing you're interested in. Do you ever find that?
Yeah.
And I kept looking around, and eventually at one point I just thought everything's about families, every single novel in the whole world. And it does get to the point where you can kind of almost see it anywhere. I felt like I was casting my net wider and wider. And at one point I found myself reading Hamlet, thinking, this is a fantastic family drama. I mean, it is really, it's about a guy who kills his brother, shacks up with the wife, the son, has an inability, gets depressed, can't seek revenge. It's an amazing, it's got all the bones of a great, family saga.
Great. And in this book in particular, Heat is a new character. Was that very deliberate that you brought it in as a sort of an extra character in the book?
Well, it's funny, I always, the Heatwave of 76, we just moved from Ireland to South Wales, and I was 4 years old when it happened. So it does kind of forms the bedrock of some of my earliest memories. I think about the age of 4 is when you're starting to lay down your earliest conscious memories. And it was South Wales was an area that was particularly badly hit. I remember it as a child, incredibly exciting. Anything at that age which is a sort of break from the norm. And there was no, you turn the taps and nothing came out. I remember being really fascinated by that, standing at the kitchen sink and turning them, and there was just nothing coming out. And we used to have to go to standpipe in the middle of the street. So in the middle of the street, which is normally where we played, there were these great things coming out of the road, and you'd go along and you'd have a big kind of drum and fill it up. And it was just incredibly exciting. But I think I hadn't quite, as a child, I think I missed the whole anxiety about it. I didn't really understand that it was really a national crisis. And when I was researching the novel, I found this document, that had been rushed through Parliament, the Drought Act.
Yeah.
And it was only really reading that I realised how serious it had been. I mean, there was nothing. The reservoirs were totally empty. You see photographs of them, and they looked like African plains. They're cracked and empty. And I think 75 had been very, very dry because there was no rain at all, hardly any rain. Even the spring of 1976, it was a real crisis. And so reading the document, you realise that the government was panicking. I mean, really panicking. And they had put in place all these contingency plans that they said they could use the army, in case. I mean, they were expecting civil riots and fights over water. It's an amazing thing. But it was just. I mean, I started writing the book it was around, I think it was about 2010, and I'd already got the idea that I wanted to write about family, and then that volcano in Iceland, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, erupted. I don't know if you remember that. And
with all the ash
cloud. A huge ash cloud was all over Northern Europe. And I was living in London at the time, and there were no planes taking off or landing. And it was really strange, because normally if you look up at the sky in London, there are always vapour trails. And there was nothing. The sky was empty, and it was blue, because it was a beautiful summer. And people started behaving in a really weird way. All my normally quite sane neighbours were sort of ranting in the streets about how they couldn't get flights and their visitors hadn't arrived and they'd had meetings cancelled and holidays had been cancelled, and there were people commandeering taxis to drive them from Paris to Madrid. And people were kind of panic buying. People were panic buying bread and milk and I kept thinking, God, this reminds me of something. What is it? This sort of state of panic and fear. And then I suddenly thought it reminds me of the Heatwave. And so somehow the two, because I'd started the novel, the two sort of became meshed in my head, and I realised that the whole novel had to be set in a Heatwave. Partly because someone also made a really casual remark to me, which is that it's often quite difficult to sort of pinpoint at what point a novel starts. You have these kind of vague concerns or interests or characters or scenes, and then often what happens is someone will say something to you and the whole thing falls into line somehow. Mm-hmm. And someone said to me, I met a guy at a party who was a retired policeman, and he said, I told him I was going to write something about Heatwave, and he said, oh, it's interesting. He said that during Heatwave, the number of people who disappear rises sharply.
Really?
Yeah. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've always been fascinated by people who just walk out of their lives, who just exit one day.
Yeah.
What makes people do that, and how do you get away with it? It's an astonishing thing to pull off, really.
And much harder now, I think,
but
probably than then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In the book as well, pregnancy and birth, and I think in quite a few of your books, pregnancy and birth are very prevalent and they're recurring themes. And why do you think they're so important within a family setting, within family life?
Well, I suppose it's what makes family, isn't it? It's where we all come from. And I suppose, it's just the scene there with Michael Francis. It's a kind of reluctant pregnancy or an accidental one, which can throw. I mean, I think I was interested in writing about Michael Francis and Claire because I think so many novels end with a marriage, and that's the kind of ending of a novel, and it's supposed to be. But of course, it's not the ending. And so I wanted to look at what happens at a marriage as it goes on. I kind of caught them in the middle of their marriage in a way.
Yeah.
I want to look at what happens after that.
And actually, there's lots of different stages of relationships, aren't there? In there, and the domesticity that Robert and Gretta have is why his disappearance is so dramatic. It's why it's so interesting, because their daily life seems so routine and normal. Yeah. And then disappears.
Michael Francis and Claire are both very good people, and they've done the right thing. They've got married and they've had their children and they've got a home, but it's not somehow quite enough. They're two people who are very good, but just trying to do their best. But it's not quite working. It's not quite enough.
And he's not reacting well to her change and her grabbing back of life.
Yeah. Well, with Claire, I was wanted to write particularly about the time, 1976, and I didn't really want to write a novel about sort of hardcore feminism because I wanted to write about, because that movement was obviously going on then, but I think the ripples of it were being felt in suburban houses, and so I wanted to address what it would be like to be a woman like Claire who has had to give up her degree, she's had to become a mum, she's staying at home with the kids, but also she's feeling the sort of ripples of change in a way, that the sort of first outreaches of feminism, and she wants to go back to do her degree, she wants to study, she wants to. And I think, Michael Francis, as I said, is a good guy, but he doesn't really like this whole new scenario. He doesn't really like what's happened. He comes home and there's no dinner on the table and the kids are filthy and she's upstairs studying. And I think he's finding it a struggle. I think the end of patriarchy is tricky for him.
Yeah, definitely. Which characters do you start with, or are they all in your head at the same time?
I don't know. There's no hard and fast rule, actually. I think every book, a bit like every child, is very different, actually. But this one, I think I did see Gretta very clearly, actually, right from the start. Gretta is the mum. And it's funny, actually, I was planning to write another book. I had a whole other idea for a different novel in my head, and I sort of made plans. I even started writing it, but it's funny, in a way, it was a bit like radio interference. I kept hearing this voice talking, and it was an Irish voice, and and it was kind of Gretta. And it's funny, because it's kind of the person she is. She sort of demands to be heard. She's one of those people who, she just never stops talking. I mean, she's sort of a disastrous communicator in a way, because she never stops talking, but never tells you actually the salient point. She never quite gets to it. I fear that for myself sometimes, actually. So in a way, yeah, she was very strongly there right from the start, and I didn't quite know at the beginning who she was and what was going to happen with her. And it's funny, I actually was in Ireland shortly after that, and in Connemara, and I think I was there with my husband and my son, who was very small then, and we went to the Aran Island, and we'd just been for a very long walk, and we got back to the car, and I saw this kind of very small sort of, it was almost like a shack, I suppose, and it had lots of kind of handicrafts, and it's the kind of place I can't ever pass, because you never know who you're going to meet in there. So I went over and had a look, and the woman in there sort of dragged me inside, and as always happens in Ireland, she told me her life story in about the first 30 seconds of us meeting. And she told me all about it. She'd gone to London in the 50s, and she'd worked in a Lions tea house, and I don't know, it was just funny, and I just was walking back to the car, and I could suddenly see Gretta. Because even though I'd been hearing her voice, I suddenly, she's meeting this woman, and I bought a hat from her, an Aran hat, incredibly itchy. I don't wear it actually anymore, but I had to buy it because she was so fascinating. And as I tried it on, she said to me, "You'll never guess who bought that exact same hat last year." And I said, "No, tell me." And she said, "Sharon Stone." So I still call it my Sharon Stone hat. I really doubt it, but you never know.
It's a nice story, though.
I don't know. So if you ever see a picture of Sharon Stone in a really itchy hat,
she's probably not wearing hers either, though.
I think it's quite, yeah. The whole thing was highly unlikely, but I liked the idea that she thought Sharon Stone had been there. Who knows? Maybe she had.
Because the bits that are in Ireland in the book, the family holiday in Ireland, and that's another kind of place and setting. And is that something from your childhood?
Yeah. I mean, I was born. My dad's from Dublin. I was born in Northern Ireland. And I haven't really, it's funny, I'm not deliberately shied away from writing about my Irish background before. It just hasn't quite come up. I've never written about it before. I think it's partly, I don't know, it's two reasons really. I think, for a very, very small country, Ireland has produced the most astonishing number of literary geniuses.
Yep.
And I always felt slightly reluctant to kind of add my voice to that in a way. And also, the other reason is I didn't want to, I didn't want to write the sort of equivalent of an Irish theme pub.
Okay.
So there's a sort of culture out there that wherever you go in the world, there's always people who claim to be Irish or want to be Irish. There's a sort of hankering for that Hibernian background. And I didn't really want to be one of them. I didn't really want to be a fake sort of pretender in a way. And it's funny, I did a book tour a while back in Australia, and I was looking down the schedule of the things I was meant to do, and one of them was, I was supposed to appear on a panel about Irish writers. And I thought, oh God, and I went to the organiser and I said, look, I'm really sorry, I don't feel very comfortable with this. I've got an Irish passport and I was born there, but I haven't lived there since I was really small. And they were totally panicked, and they said, but you're the most Irish person we have. Everybody else has got one sort of Irish grandparent, 6 generations back. We really need you to be on the panel. So it was quite a sort of salutary lesson in a way, that even though I feel sort of reluctant about claiming to be Irish, just because I feel fake, I suppose. So anyway, but it's funny, I was having, I was at a dinner party, in fact, and we all started telling sort of stories about meeting boyfriend or girlfriend's parents for the first time. And I said, oh, this really funny thing happened to me once. And I said I was at university and I went home with my then boyfriend and we were booking ferry tickets, and his dad came in, picked up my Irish passport and said, are you in the IRA? And I thought it was quite a funny story, but there was this kind of terrible dead silence around the table, like sort of tumbleweed, and they all just said, that can't have happened. And I said, no, it did happen. And they were absolutely horrified. And they said, I can't believe anyone would say that to you.
It is quite horrifying.
Well, I suppose, and it's funny, it was a sort of an interesting lesson, because I thought it was quite widespread that there was a lot of anti-Irish feeling especially in the 70s,
Yeah.
obviously, because, relations were at an all-time low. It was Bloody Sunday, and then those awful pub bombings, and, there was a terribly fraught time between the two countries. But, I mean, this was in 1990 it would have been. So even up until that point, I think there is a very, very strong fear. And we had it a lot when we were growing up, it was just one of those things you got used to. People accusing you, or, terrible jokes and accusing you. And I remember being really pleased one day because a girl in my class asked me to play, and I told my mum, I said, I'm going around to so-and-so's house to play. And then the next day she came in and she said, my mum says I can't have you because we can't have Irish in the house.
Oh, wow.
I would be really kind of, that's a shame. I think she said dirty Irish, not like dirty Irish in the house. She'd obviously told her mum my name, and the mum had said, no, she can't come. So it was just, it was just something we grew up with, the knowledge. So I was surprised that my friends didn't know this. And so I did think after that dinner party, I thought maybe there is a story to be told about the second generation experience in Ireland. So that's why I wrote the book. Excellent.
I'll open up to the floor. I just want to talk a little about, I'm probably going to say wrong, Aoife.
That's right.
Oh,
well
wow,
done.
Yes. And the dyslexia, as we now know it, but I think reading some of the message boards when I was sort of doing some research into the book, it doesn't seem to be as easy to diagnose, or it doesn't seem to be as easily diagnosed as you might hope. There seems to still be a lingering issue that people are still coming out of school unable to read. And did you know that when you put that into the book, or was that something that you thought was long gone from schools?
No, not at all. It's something, it was funny, when I was writing the book, one of my children was diagnosed with dyslexia.
Right.
So it was something sort of very uppermost in my mind at the time I was writing it. And I did go, it's not something I know much about actually at all. It was a bit of a surprise because we don't have it in my family or my husband's family. So, it's not always necessarily genetic. And so I went to the library and kind of got as many books as I could read about it just to try and understand it, how to help my child. And so, it was, and I think that's the response of a mother, you just have to find out how you can help them.
Yeah.
But also, I think as a novelist, your reaction's a bit more abstract. I just kept thinking when I was reading these books, and, it's one tiny word which covers, a vast array of different symptoms and challenges. So it's a very varying condition which affects no two people the same, which I think is often why it's not always diagnosed. People just think it means you can't read, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And I just kept thinking when I was reading through it, I thought, God, what would happen to all these kids who just never just slipped through
Amazing.
the net? Even before all these books were written, all the diagnoses, or there were additional needs teachers, and even now you'd think that teachers are always on the lookout for it. And if there's a child who's about 6 who just isn't quite hitting those milestones, you'd hope that somebody would be looking out for them. But as you say, they're not.
Doesn't always happen.
All the time you hear stories about kids who get to university and someone suddenly says, you've got a problem, you've got this challenge, you've got this difficulty. But partly I was thinking, I just thought, what would happen if nobody had ever heard of it and no one had any awareness of it, and which happened, it's like 10% or something of the population, they say, who are affected by it. So that's where Aoife came from. But it's funny, while I was writing it, I did a bit of research on people in the past, and I met a woman who was in her 60s before she had told her husband and sons, who were grown up, that she couldn't read.
Wow, amazing.
And she had managed to conceal it for the whole of her life. It was astonishing. And she said that when the boys were young, she used to go to the library with them, and they would get lots of books and they would bring them home. And she said the first night she would get her husband to read the bedtime story, and she said she would stand behind the bedroom door listening and committing it to memory, so the next night she could open it and pretend that she was reading it. It's absolutely astonishing story. Yeah, but she did learn to read at the age of 62 or something. She confessed it to her husband, who of course was horrified and very supportive, because he was a very nice man. And she went into an adult literacy support program, and she can read now, but with struggle, because it's all, it's a lifelong condition. There's no solution for it. You just have to
learn to deal.
Yeah, you have to just learn to deal with it.
Yeah. Have you had quite a lot of reader reaction to that element of the story?
Yeah, a lot actually. A lot of letters and things about it. I think. I don't know if it's ever really been written about before. I'm not sure. I'm sure there are books about it, but I just thought it was an interesting idea. It was a kind of what if question. What would happen if somebody had this and they had to hide it? It's all these astonishing. Because a lot of dyslexic they develop incredible I always think, especially because one of my kids is dyslexic, I always like to think about it in terms of talents rather than deficits.
Yep.
And dyslexics are talented in so many ways, but particularly in memory. They can memorize anything almost by hearing it once. My child can listen to an audiobook and can almost recite it afterwards. It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. Nothing I could do it in a million years. But so I think, there are a lot of interesting ways. It's not a condition that should always be pitied. I think it's a condition which has amazing talents.
And there are lots of ways now of coping and dealing with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't read any of your reviews, do you?
No.
So is that something? So you don't know if that was some element that the reviewers picked up on? You've no idea. Brilliant.
Yeah, I don't read.
When did you decide not to read reviews?
Well, it's funny. I read them for my first book, and I just decided then. I thought I'm never going to do this again. Partly because it's not only. I don't even read the nice ones. My husband reads them for me, and he tells me if they're good or if they're sort of middling or bad. And if they're bad, he tells me who wrote them. You have to know. You've got to know who your enemies are. And but it's mainly because I don't. I think the worst thing as a writer is to have a kind of awareness of. I don't know. You don't need to self-explain to yourself.
Yeah.
I need to write in an absolute vacuum. I need to think that I'm just writing it for myself and maybe for a couple of friends.
So you don't think too much about audience when you're writing?
No, absolutely not, deliberately not.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can't. I think if you're, I think the worst thing as a writer is for somebody to say to you, your concerns are this, or you like this kind of metaphor, or your characters are involved in this kind of concern. It's you don't need to hear that. You've got to, for me, most of all, writing has to feel like walking a tightrope. It's just, you've got to forget about the drop, you've got to forget about the audience watching, you've just got to keep your eye on a destination and just keep going. I think the minute you think about it, or second guess it, you're going to fall off.
And how much then have you got all of the story in your head before you put pen to paper?
Well, it varies actually. Some books more than others, but usually not. I'm not much of a planner in life or in fiction actually. So I suppose, I know there are writers who will, absolutely plan each chapter before they start, but I'm not like that at all. And I will have a vague idea, and I know roughly where the book is going, but usually the book will take a right angle while I'm writing it. But I quite like that. I kind of embrace that.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily end up where you thought it would end up?
Not at all. And sometimes you write, the first or second or third. I'm a big redrafter. Often I do 20, 21, 22 drafts. Yeah, easily. But often, I think, I get to the end of the first draft and I look at it as kind of a sculptor. I might look at marble or clay, a block of marble. You've got to hew your book from it. And often you don't. The thing actually about Aoife's dyslexia as an example, that was a very, very, very tiny part of the book for quite some time. And then actually, I think it was my editor who went through it. She kind of said that. She said, you need to focus more on that. And she was right.
And which draft does your editor see then?
Oh God, probably 7 or 8.
Right.
My husband might see 5 or 6, and then goes through another few stages, probably.
Excellent. Well, that's, I think, a nice point to open up. Have we got any questions? I think we have a roving mic somewhere over there. So if you have a question, put your hands in the air.
Nobody likes to go first.
Oh
no, there we go. A bit more ballsy and Dundee.
Hello. One of the things about the voice of the book I found really intriguing was the humour that comes alongside, some of the bleaker themes. And in that first extract that you read, that was particularly clear. I wondered if that was something you work very hard at, or if it's something that comes naturally to you while you're writing.
No, I don't really think of myself particularly as a funny person. And I think it's funny actually. A lot of people said to me, slightly surprised, this is quite a funny book. I don't think any of my others are particularly. And I didn't really write it as such. I was quite surprised that people find some of it funny, but I think also it's family life, isn't it? I think in a lot of ways, a lot of families do approach that kind of thing with humour. I think it's the only way often to cope with, the interaction of 5 very, very strong and very, very different personalities. I think that's often the way you can carry yourself on, I think, as a family. You've got to find... I think often humour can be a kind of common ground, because families are such a melting pot of very, very diverse personalities that they can be. And I think often humour is the common ground between all that, or the sort of... or the oil, in a way, of the whole machinery, possibly. don't know if that makes any sense. You're nodding very nicely.
How much of do you feel, you know, the sort of drama that the family have within them is humorous, and how much was it, you know, did you mean it to be full on, you know, suicidal, knives to throats kind of stuff?
I think it's mainly Gretta. I mean, she's very melodramatic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody says that about her, and she's very over the top. And of course she doesn't mean it. You know, she'd no sooner slit her throat than, you know, say she was Protestant. You know, she just isn't going to do that. But it's just part of her cant and drama and the way she is. But I think a lot of families are like that. I think there's a lot of threat and drama.
Do we have anyone else brave enough to put their hand up? A question just down here, and then one there.
It's not so much specifically about this book, Maggie, but it's more in general. I think your settings really influence the emotion, and they're really integral to the stories. I was just wondering if they always come first when you think about a book or a story.
The settings,
like Edinburgh would be my example. So that's my
it's hard to say really. I often find it easier to write about a place where I'm not. So it's funny actually. Some of my books are set in Edinburgh, and a lot of them are set in London. And often, actually, if I look down at it, I would realise that when I was living in London, I would write about Edinburgh. Living in Edinburgh, I'd write about London. It's somehow easier to kind of sort of create a fictional universe when you're not confronted daily by that sort of reality. So in a way, I don't know, perhaps. And this one ends in the west of Ireland, where I used to go on holiday a lot when I was a child. And it was odd, actually. I wrote the book, and it ends in Omey Island, which is an island off the coast of Galway. I was thinking, it's funny, I was thinking one night about books about heat. And I remembered that Alice in Wonderland starts with a very, very hot day. That's why Alice falls asleep. You know, it's why she has the adventure, has the dream. And I remember it being read to me in Ireland. And I said to my mum, I said, do you remember reading us Alice in Wonderland in Ireland? And she said, yes, I remember that. She said, it would have been 1976, and we would have been in Omey Island. And it was really odd, and it never occurred to me that I was in Omey Island in 1976. I totally, you know, what it's like when you look back on your childhood holidays, it's all slightly blurred. And it was just really odd. It was like a sort of Mobius strip coming back to meet on itself, and I realised that probably subconsciously I'd written about the place I was in 1976. I mean, there is a 4-year-old girl in the book, slightly as a little joke to myself, really, but it was odd that it was a strange moment when I realised that it all come round again. But so positive, yeah, I'm sure it is. I think it is a very emotional thing, but I find it difficult. I would never be able to write about somewhere where I actually am at the time of writing. I would find that really hard.
And could you write about somewhere that you don't know intimately?
No, I don't think you could. It doesn't feel right. I used to work as a journalist on the books desk of The Independent on Sunday, and I remember some publishers sending us a novel saying, oh, it's incredible, this American girl has written about London and she's never been there. And we thought, that's a bit weird. I remember reading it, and it was like a joke. We'd read out bits and go, have you read this bit? It's so funny. And I mean, poor girl, probably, you know. It sounds very cruel to say that, but it was actually hilarious to think, well, why would you sell a book on that?
Yeah.
Why would you sell a book on that point? Because it was very, and you think, well, why would you write a book about a place you've never been? I mean, choose somewhere else. Choose New York, if that's where you live. I don't know, it's very peculiar. So no, I don't think I could, or would, actually.
This lady in the pink down here with a question.
She's getting her exercise now. There's someone all the way over there now.
Doing it deliberately.
Going back to the dyslexia, when Aoife left New York, Gabe wrote something on the window. Can you tell us what it was?
See, it's funny. It never occurs to me. So many people ask me that, and I can see that it's a really frustrating thing. It never occurred to me that it would be annoying. But yeah, I can see it. But actually, I kind of deliberately wanted the reader to have Aoife's point of view. That's why I made it a bit oblique. But I think he writes when you think about the apartment, because he's asking her to move in with him, but she can't read it because she can't read.
I guess that's building on from the previous question, which is Greta's husband's the most underdeveloped character in the book, and he gets up and leaves, and you work it out at the end. And again, are you making the readers work it out? Why can't he just tell Greta?
Like I tell Greta, because I'm not in the novel.
So why can't he just tell Greta that he has
Why
to
can't
go?
he tell Greta? Oh, I see what you mean. Well, because I think that Robert and Greta are very much of a generation that they wouldn't talk about it. I think, and I wanted to kind of accurately reflect that. I think the kind of the idea that husbands and wives must talk about everything, get it all out in the open, I think is quite a modern idea. And I think the generation that Greta and Robert are, they just wouldn't have done it. You know, if I think about my grandparents or parents, you know, possibly that generation, I think any kind of unpleasantness was just swept away. That's the way they dealt with it. That was the time. There was no kind of, we must go and see a marriage counsellor, we must get it all out on the table. I don't think they did it. And I think it's really, really common in those days for just anything that was awkward just to be hidden away. And I think actually it's funny, I was having this conversation at a time, in a situation like this, and someone asked me what would happen when Robert comes back, and I said I don't think they would talk about it. I think they would just carry on. I think Greta would bring him back in, and that would be that. She'd say, do you want a cup of tea? I honestly don't think they would say, where have you been? Tell me, tell me, tell me. They just wouldn't do it. It's just not that generation. And it's alien to us now because I think our culture is very much, we must discuss everything, we must bring it all out in the open, but I don't think Greta and Robert would. I still don't think they would.
The difference is his children are there when he comes back, and they might ask.
That's possible, but I think, I don't know. I always imagine them just leaving Greta and Robert to it. I think they know them quite well. I don't think anything would be resolved as we look at it now, but I think they would just carry on as they were. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think that's just the way people did things in those days, but yeah.
I also thought Greta knew where he
Greta
was.
knows, yeah. She knows where he is.
It's more why she doesn't tell anyone.
She can't tell anyone because of the fact, yeah, exactly. She can't tell her kids because there's a terrible secret as to why she knows and how she knows. So yeah, I do think people, I think it's particularly those generations, they just didn't talk about that stuff. They kept it all, and I think that's often why people of our generation often uncover really shocking things. You know, particularly when their parents die. You know, I've known friends who found out they were adopted and they had no idea just by looking through their parents' documents. You know, a total shock. A really good friend of mine found out at the age of 42 that she'd been adopted at the age of 1.5, and she had no idea at all. And you know, to us that's shocking because of course these days you're told, you know, if you adopt a child it's all very much in the open, but in that generation it's just what you did. It was just the advice they took, I think.
But do you think that means then in years to come there won't be these big family secrets? Do you think, you know?
Oh, probably.
Yeah. They'll just be hidden in a different way.
I think we've all got secrets, haven't we? Whether we'd be prepared to admit it or not.
Yeah, probably. Have we got anyone else who would like to ask a question? We've got a lady down the front here.
You referred in passing to your unconscious, your own life creeping in to the narrative of the novel. And do you think, I don't believe novels are just novels and they're just made up stories. I think that always there's an element of the writer's life there, always, whether it's unconscious or conscious. And that's what makes it interesting.
Can I just check, did everyone hear that? Because you've got a beautifully soft voice. The lady was asking whether or what element of a writer's life or what element of Maggie's life is in her books. I think that would...
Yeah. I think it happened, I think it varies actually from novel to novel. And I think, I don't write autobiographically. I'm not an autobiographical writer at all. No, I know, but I think there are obviously, inevitably, there are elements of your life that will filter into the book, like my child having dyslexia and the cat in the novel who dies is my cat who died. It's very, very recognisably so to people who knew him. But you know, I think often when I think that's inevitable. You know, and I think fiction is a real palimpsest of things that you borrow from other people, things that you make up, and things that you might sort of filter from your own experience. But the thing is, once you've sort of rewritten it and recast it and reimagined it, it doesn't feel like it's yours as well. I mean, it might be the starting point. I mean, when I wrote about Monica with the cat dying, my cat had been put down about a month or two before, and I loved that cat. My husband hated him, and so even though Monica is nothing like my husband, her aversion to the cat is totally lifted for my husband. And he read that and laughed and said, "That's me, isn't it? That's very weird. You recast me as a middle-aged housewife." Obviously, it's not him, but his kind of horror of this cat that we had, who was wonderful, by the way. I think that's just a prime example. It doesn't always. It can come out sideways or in a slightly twisted way. But I think that's why it's odd for people who know you well to read your books. Because I remember my younger sister telling me she was reading one of my novels and reading it along. It was a story, and suddenly she turned a page, and it was a conversation that she and I had, or a tiny part of it. So I think it is peculiar. I mean, I think my husband's a writer, and I have the same experience when I read his books. I can be totally immersed in fiction, suddenly thinks, "Hey, I never said that. Well, I didn't mean it like that at all." It does happen inevitably, and I think any writer who says it doesn't is probably lying, because obviously, as you say, it does, but it doesn't make it autobiography. I think it's a very tricky grey area.
If you're both writers, how does that work at home? Do you have separate studies, or do you make sure you...
Oh my God, yes, we'd have to have separate studies. He's a real jazz fan, listens to jazz all the time.
Even when writing?
Yeah, and I like a lot of music, but I hate jazz. I really do. It's like the sort of strobe lighting on an epileptic. I can't even listen to it. So yeah, so we have to have, I have to have earplugs in.
And you go...
Because we've got really young kids, so often we're not working at the same time anyway. One of us is with the kids and one of us is working, so... Yeah, it's just, I don't know, I think it's just the same as any couple who've got the same job. It just seems normal to us. There's a lot less to explain when your partner's a writer.
Yeah.
I mean, if he comes into my study and I say, "I can't talk to you now, go away," he doesn't take offence.
He just accepts that.
Yeah, he just thinks, "Okay, sorry." And vice versa.
But you don't meet at sort of 12 o'clock for lunch?
Oh, God,
Come
no.
out your
No,
studies.
God, I wish
It's
we
not
did,
that
I wish
organised.
we had that regular, and not so. It's total chaos, that household, always scrambling from one nursery pickup to school pickup to, anyway, so, no.
Nice idea, though. Got a lady down here with a question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things I love about your books is the way you write about loss, but they also, certainly in the case of after you'd gone, I couldn't stop weeping. And I just wondered whether writing about loss is something that's painful for you to do at the time, or whether you end up weeping, or how you deal with that, or whether maybe it's just a catharsis. I don't know, but it's something that strikes me.
Yeah, I probably do actually. Yeah, I mean you do. I think you get very, obviously, and necessarily as well, you get very attached to your characters and the situations they're in and the emotions they're feeling. So yes, I'm sure I do actually. In fact, there's one passage in my book, The Hand That First Held Mine, when a woman is in the sea looking back at the beach and her child's on the beach and she realises she's not going to make it back.
Oh, it's terrible.
And someone recently on the radio said, "Can you read that?" And I looked at it and I said, "Actually, you know what, I can't." So I just can't read it because I won't be able to get through it. So I think it does. You do. I mean, I think you have to be. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to write it. If you felt detached from it, you probably wouldn't write about it very well. You have to feel as though you're in the situation. So no, you do. You do actually.
Okay, I'm going to allow time for maybe one. I've got one more question, and then we'll wrap up just in time so we can do some signing and things.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, with William Boyd writing the last James Bond book, would you like to get a commission to write about a particular character, or would that be completely against the way that you work? Or would you like to write a James Bond book specifically?
God, I don't think I could ever write. God knows what it would be like. I don't know. I've never accepted a commission. I was offered one recently, actually, one of the Jane Austen books, and I turned it down. I didn't want to do it, partly because why would you want to rewrite Jane Austen? Really? But anyway, that's a whole other debate. But I don't know. I don't know if I ever would actually. At the moment, I've got such time pressure with having young kids. I don't think I can ever really write what I really have to write, what I really need to write, which is the stuff, my books, I suppose. But I don't know, when my kids are older, possibly, who knows. But at the moment, I just have to, I've got such a kind of pared down time and opportunity to write. I just got to write what I really need to write. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know if I could ever work to commission, but you never know. You never know. I'm not sure about the James. I don't know if 007 is going to come knocking at my door though. So I don't really see a very natural choice for that.
Then maybe that'd be a good option. Something totally left field. How do you get your head into the writing space with young children and having to dip in and out and come to things like this? You know, how do you manage to keep the idea of the book that you're working on in your head? Is it there all the time, or can you dip into it quite quickly?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think you don't, with, you know, having the pressure of sort of young kids, is you don't really have a lot of room for being self-indulgent. So you can't sit around at your desk thinking, oh, I'm just not in the mood today. It doesn't really happen at the moment. Usually by the time I get to my desk, I'm so desperate to be there that it just I just know that I've got, if the baby's napping, I think, well, I've got maybe an hour, maybe 45 minutes, so I've just got to get on with it. And you don't even finish a sentence often. So I just, if I'm writing and the baby wakes up, I just type, start here in capital letters and just shut the computer and off I go. And often it is mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, and then the next day I'll just open it up and look for where I wrote, start here, and just carry on.
And can you get back into it that quickly? You know what you meant to say. You know how that sentence was meant to finish.
You just have to. I think with young kids, you just focus. You just have to learn absolute focus. And I don't know. Somehow, I'm not saying it's easy, because it isn't, but I don't think it's any harder than any parent who also works. I honestly don't think it's harder. In a lot of ways it's easier because I get to stay at home with them. I don't have to clock in and clock out as a lot of people do. So I find it a bit I don't know, the whole kind of there's a whole sort of school of thought that you can't have kids and write and every baby costs you a book and the pram in the hallway, and it's always made me nervous, but actually the more kids I have and the more books I write, I think it's nonsense. It's total nonsense. You just get on with it. There's no preciousness about it. You've just got to, if you want to do it, you'll find time to do it.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I think we're going to finish up. I just want to do a few sort of housekeeping things. So Maggie is going to be signing upstairs. If you're coming to the John Waite event afterwards, can you make yourself known so we can get you signed first and back down here for the John Waite event, because that event is in here. So just make yourself known to one of the staff and we'll get you to the front of the queue, and Maggie will sign everyone's book, so you don't need to, I say that, you will. So you don't need to worry that you won't get your book signed, but it would be great if we can get the people who are coming to the next event done first, so they're back here on time. Just leaves me to give Maggie a very warm thank you. That's been a lovely event, and thank you all for coming.